Russia has 40 nuclear-powered icebreakers. The United States has one. Let that sink in. The most powerful military nation on Earth cannot independently operate in its own backyard. And while Washington has been looking the other way, two countries you probably haven't thought much about, in Canada and Finland, have been quietly building something that could completely redraw the map of global power. Stay with me, because this story is not what you think it is. Most people hear Arctic and picture polar bears or a BBC nature documentary. What they don't picture is a trillion-dollar battlefield. But that's exactly what it's becoming. As the ice melts, and it is melting faster than any model predicted, entirely new shipping routes are opening between Asia and Europe, cutting travel time by weeks. Beneath that ice sits an almost incomprehensible reserve of oil, gas, rare earth minerals, and critical metals that the entire modern economy depends on. And sitting right on top of all of it are a handful of countries scrambling to claim dominance before the window opens. If you haven't been paying attention to the Arctic, you've been missing the most consequential geopolitical story of this decade. Drop a comment right now. Do you think the US is losing the Arctic through sheer neglect? I read every single one. Russia moved first. They've been constructing Arctic military bases since the early 2010s, reopening Soviet-era air stations that had been frozen and abandoned for decades, and investing massively in their icebreaker fleet, nuclear-powered vessels so powerful they slice through ice that would completely stop anything the West currently operates. In 2007, Russia sent a submarine to plant a flag on the actual floor of the Arctic Ocean at the North Pole, mostly symbolic, but deeply revealing. The Arctic isn't just territory to Russia, it's identity, it's legacy, it's the long game. And while Russia was playing a 30-year chess match, the West was barely paying attention. The US let its icebreaker fleet age out through decades of underfunding and strategic indifference. They had a fleet once, they don't anymore. What they have now is a single medium-class vessel called the Healy. If the United States needs to project serious hard power into the high Arctic today, it operationally cannot. That is not commentary, that is fact. And here's the part nobody's connecting yet. This gap is precisely why what Canada and Finland are doing right now matters so much more than anyone in mainstream media is acknowledging. Canada has 18 icebreakers. Finland has 8. Between just those two countries, you have more Arctic operational capacity than almost the entire rest of the Western Alliance combined. And now they are doing something genuinely unprecedented. They are coordinating that capacity, sharing technology, training together, building toward what is effectively a northern power bloc, with the United States included, but, critically, not leading. Canada and Finland are driving this agenda. Think carefully about what that represents. For most of the post-World War II era, alliances worked in one direction. America decides, everyone else adjusts. That architecture is cracking, not collapsing, cracking. And the Arctic is one of the clearest places you can see the fracture lines. Now here is where this story takes a turn that most people aren't expecting. And this is the connection that genuinely stopped me when I first mapped it out. Ukraine. Between December and April, Ukraine was reportedly eliminating somewhere between 30,000 and 35,000 Russian soldiers per month. The casualty ratio, across multiple independent assessments, runs roughly 5 Russian losses for every 1 Ukrainian. Those numbers, if they hold, represent an attrition rate that no scenario in Moscow's military planning had ever modeled when this war began. But the more important number is this one. 95% of those engagements are being driven by unmanned systems, not traditional armor, not artillery duels, drones, small, cheap, commercial-grade drones that have been modified, weaponized, and operated by people sitting in basements watching laptop screens. The entire logic of conventional warfare, the armored column, the infantry advance, the territorial grind, is being rewritten in real time on Ukrainian soil, and Finland and Canada are not just watching this as a humanitarian crisis, they are studying it as a laboratory. Because the lessons coming out of Ukraine about satellite communications, electronic countermeasures, AI-assisted targeting, and autonomous systems are being directly absorbed into how these countries are designing their own Arctic defense doctrine. Finland brings something to this partnership that no defense budget can simply purchase: institutional human knowledge. Every Finnish citizen, men and women, goes through military service, Arctic military service. They don't just learn how to fight, they learn how to survive in conditions that would kill most soldiers in 48 hours. Whiteout conditions, temperatures that make every mechanical system want to seize and fail. Finland has shared a border with Russia for centuries. They fought them in the Winter War. They know what that threat actually looks like at a bone-deep level that no training exercise can replicate. That knowledge is now being offered to the alliance, and it is genuinely priceless. Canada, for its part, brings scale, the longest Arctic coastline on Earth, vast northern territory, and increasingly something that honestly has not always been present in Canadian defense thinking, genuine political will to actually defend it. Whether that will is translating into action fast enough is a real and uncomfortable question, but the direction has changed. There is a diplomatic dimension here that is almost stranger than fiction. Finland's president has developed a working reputation as someone who can maintain a functional relationship with the current American political climate, which, for most traditional allies right now, is somewhere between complicated and exhausting. But when you look at how he actually describes it, it is not softness, it is directness. It is speaking both languages simultaneously, saying, yes, we share your values, and here is exactly what you get from this relationship in concrete, tangible, strategic terms. Because here is the reality that every middle power and small power on Earth is currently being forced to absorb. American foreign policy has become significantly more transactional. The question being asked in Washington is no longer simply, are you a democratic ally who shares our principles? It is, what are you bringing to the table? What minerals? What manufacturing capacity? What strategic position? What deal? This is a seismic shift for countries that built their entire foreign policy identity around the assumption that being a good ally was sufficient. It is not sufficient anymore. And the leaders navigating it successfully are the ones who understand that alignment on values and delivery of concrete strategic value are no longer the same conversation. They have to happen together. Here is the idea that sounds like it came from a satirical headline, but is actually being discussed at serious levels. Could Canada deepen its relationship with the European Union to a degree that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago? The president of Finland, and who literally wrote his doctoral dissertation on what is called flexible integration, does not think this conversation is absurd. Flexible integration is the principle that the European Union does not have to be a single monolithic structure where every member does identical things. Some countries are in the Eurozone, some are not. Some are in Schengen, some are not. The architecture for variable geometry already exists, and Canada's value alignment with Europe, democratic institutions, rule of law, multilateral orientation, human rights frameworks, is arguably closer than several countries that are currently inside the EU. Geographically, it is obviously unconventional, but geography in the 21st century is not the constraint it once was. What matters is legal, economic, and security integration. On those dimensions, a dramatically deeper Canada-EU relationship is not only possible. There is a serious case it is strategically overdue. What is actually being built here, if you draw it out, is not a traditional alliance. It is a network, a northern web of relationships anchored on shared geography, shared threat perception, and shared values. Canada's coastline and resources, Finland's military culture and EU seat, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark extending the arc, and underneath all of it, the technological layer, satellites, drone networks, underwater sensor arrays, quantum communications encryption, the infrastructure of 21st century Arctic control. Finland's contributions here are not just military, they are technical. Nokia is Finnish. Finland has deep applied expertise in telecommunications and quantum research. Canada's northern geography provides the physical locations where that infrastructure gets placed. Together, they are building capabilities that most analysts won't fully understand until the next decade, when they suddenly become impossible to ignore. None of this is anti-American. Let's be clear about that. The United States remains the irreplaceable anchor of NATO. American air power, nuclear deterrence, logistics infrastructure, and intelligence capability cannot be replicated by anyone else in the alliance. What is changing is not whether the U.S. matters. It is how much the other members of the alliance are willing to carry weight they previously offloaded to Washington. And here is the irony worth sitting with. The U.S. has been asking allies to spend more, do more, and free ride less for 3 consecutive decades. Now that they are actually doing it, in ways that give them independent capacity and, crucially, independent voice, it creates its own complications. That is the nature of alliances. They evolve. And the Arctic is where that evolution is happening at the fastest visible pace right now. The Arctic is going to get more contested, not less. Russia's strategic interest in the high north predates Putin by decades and will outlast him regardless of how the Ukraine war resolves. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state, a claim that is geographically creative, to put it charitably, but strategically revealing. They are investing in Arctic research stations, shipping infrastructure, and relationships with nations that have Arctic territory. The high north is becoming genuinely multipolar in a way it never was even during the Cold War. The Canada-Finland partnership is not a solution to all of that complexity, but it is a serious, substantive, long-game response from 2 countries that have decided not to wait for someone else to manage their neighborhood. They are building the capacity. They are building the relationships. They are thinking 20 years ahead. In a political world that is almost entirely driven by the next news cycle, that is genuinely notable. The goal of everything laid out here is not fear. The Finnish president's actual disposition, by every account, is not pessimistic. It is pragmatic. If you do the work, if you use your position intelligently, if you build the right relationships, things work out. Not without friction, not perfectly, but they work out. That is probably the right frame for everything happening in the Arctic right now. Not panic, not wishful thinking. Clear eyes, real partnerships, and a long horizon. The Arctic is no longer the edge of the world. It may actually be becoming the center of it. If you made it this far, you already understand why this story matters more than most of what makes the front page. Share this with one person who you think needs to see it. And leave a comment. Do you think Canada is making the right moves, or is it already too late to catch up? Is the US sleepwalking into losing the Arctic? I want to know what you actually think. We cover analysis like this every single day. The stories that are reshaping the world before most people even notice. If that is what you are looking for, subscribing takes 2 seconds, and it is genuinely worth it.